SAAB has created many supreme automotive designs. But SAAB marches to its own tune. And breaking from tradition only enhances its appeal. SAAB's independence can be traced to its precarious development on the wings of Sweden's post-war aviation industry. Its engineers and designers gambled on their ability to transform their aviation experience into automobile manufacturing. Today, their efforts are admired worldwide, but SAAB's transformation from wings to wheels has been a long and difficult journey. By the mid-1930s, most people believed that war was imminent. Nearly all attempts to avoid confrontation or claim neutrality would be fruitless. Many knew that assurances about Hitler's peaceful intentions were worthless. Europe was preparing for war. With the headlines came fear. For Sweden, the defense of its neutrality required mobilization for the entire population. Recruiting centers sprang up across the country. Invasion was everybody's fear. At the railway stations, family and friends departed, filled with hope and fear. A final hug, a long train ride. Ahead, long months of training and waiting. In Sweden, preparing for war was seen as arming for peace. Sweden's Air Force was a collection of light aircraft, only capable of token resistance to the German Luftwaffe. Their reconnaissance aircraft were slow, lumbering targets. Although effective in World War I, they now outlived their usefulness. Sweden's Prime Minister, Per Albin Hansson, felt that his nation should produce its own weapons. The Swedish government quickly created Svenska Aeroplana Aktiebolaget, or SAAB, in May 1937. Funding approved, the build-up began.
SAAB, that is 4 letters, SAAB, and it stands for, in Swedish it's pronounced Svenska Aeroplan Aktiebolaget, and translated into English it is Swedish airplane, and aktie is the same as stock. We have it in stock market, and bolag is corporation. So it's really Swedish Airplane Incorporated.
Building aircraft requires complex engineering, planning, and building technologies governed by integrated systems and controls. In order to acquire the necessary technology, SAAB began licensed production of foreign aircraft, assembling German Junkers Ju-86K bombers. The Ju-86 began life in 1934 as a commercial airliner. Within a year, a military version was being made available for export. In Germany, it formed the original bomber squadrons of the rearming Luftwaffe. It was considered obsolete by the time SAAB obtained their license. Germany had designed newer aircraft, and the Ju-86 was relegated to reconnaissance duty. SAAB engineers had difficulty understanding the German advanced mathematics for strength and load calculations. Using what they learned from the German planes and American manufacturers, their skills grew. Eventually, SAAB engineers designed, built, and tested a Swedish airplane. It was known as the SAAB 17. It was a single-engine two-seater that could be configured as a dive bomber, a vertical bomber, or a reconnaissance aircraft. It was the first Swedish airplane to be built completely from metal. The SAAB 17 made its first flight in May 1940. 325 would be built in the next 4 years. It remained in service into the 1950s.
Being a very small country and few resources, we had to figure out what is the best type of airplane for our conditions. Engineering in Sweden has a certain background, which is at least it was known for very high quality and making very good analysis early upstream. So the aircraft were fairly small, and you created early new technology which was brought into the aircrafts.
A second plane, the BST-18, was a powerful twin-engined all-metal bomber. It was a major achievement for a young company. A year later, a third plane, the JA-21, a highly advanced fighter with a pusher propeller, began test flights. This radical design required an ejection seat to launch pilots safely past its propeller. This design eventually became Sweden's first jet. Its first flight almost ended in catastrophe when the landing gear brakes didn't release. The landing gear smashed into the fence at the end of the runway. Pilot Klaus Smith was able to complete the takeoff, only to collapse the main gear on landing. As the end of the war drew near, SAAB realized that post-war commercial aircraft production wouldn't provide enough jobs. The solution? Build cars.
When the World War II ended and the demand went down, it was necessary to look for some other products for that area, for that specific area. And the plant was there, and a natural thing was really to look for maybe just cars, because that's another way of transportation.
After World War II, American automobiles became common in Sweden. Rural towns were growing, Sweden was expanding its road system, and the need for personal transportation put pressure on dealers to provide new cars. Sweden had a climate that was, to say the least, challenging. Heavy snow in the north, with dense fog and rain in the south, made driving an adventure. Large American cars offered strength and style, but handled badly on ice. During the 30s and 40s, ANA, an independent auto assembler, was established to put together Chrysler automobiles. Taking advantage of cheaper labor and freight costs, Plymouth exported car kits to Sweden for assembly and sale. The 5,000 parts needed for each car were assembled by hand. Post-war Europe was impoverished. There was a high demand for steel to rebuild the continent. Any project that required large amounts of steel was subject to delays and shortages. Importing kit cars was a perfect interim solution in a ravaged economy. This process didn't require tooling, foundries, or large stocks of raw materials. Although it only created a small number of cars, it did offer employment. In 1944, as the trend towards the small car was increasing, SAAB assembled the team that would build its first car. During a World War II test flight, a German V-1 rocket crashed in the Baltic Sea near Sweden. Sixten Saasen, a SAAB design engineer, produced detailed drawings of the rocket's engines. His sketches of the V-1 parts were said to be secretly flown to England for analysis. Saasen was a stylish fellow with the rare ability to think in metal. He could translate concepts into reality at a reasonable cost. As a design engineer, he was a genius. Saasen and Gunnar Ljungström, an airfoil engineer, were chosen to create SAAB's first automobile. Ljungström was well educated and had an innate sense of form and function. Without any automotive experience, he was about to create a car. Rumor had it only 2 of SAAB's original staff members possessed a driver's license.
Gunnar Ljungström is definitely the father of SAAB cars, and he was from the very beginning. Well, he's coming from the Ljungström family, which is a very well-known engineering family. They engineered turbines, ships, and then now airplanes, and then cars.
It was obvious that the first SAAB came from an aircraft manufacturer. Gunnar Ljungström decided on front-wheel drive and a 2-cylinder 2-stroke engine.
Sixten Saasen was the designer or creating the exterior of the car, and he was really the visionary in terms of the visible things, while Gunnar Ljungström was a visionary of the more invisible things.
It took less than 6 months to build the prototype. The components were hammered into shape by a 70-year-old panel beater over oak dollies cushioned on piles of horse manure. It was an exhausting process. Materials were scarce. The design team scoured the local scrapyard for parts. The prototype was fitted with a pre-war German 2-stroke engine and front-wheel drive. But the 2-stroke engine, which was reliable for its time, would later become a millstone around Gunnar's neck. On February 27, 1947, SAAB's board of directors approved the decision to proceed. A new car was born.
After 100 days of blockade...
But the world was again becoming dangerous. In 1948, Soviet troops blockaded the access routes to the occupied city of Berlin. To SAAB, this meant that all civil aircraft activities had to be abandoned in favor of military requirements. The Swedish Air Force expanded to become the 4th largest in the world. Meanwhile, the prototype was subjected to a punishing test program. It became apparent to company officers that this airfoil on wheels was indeed tough enough. But the demands for new military aircraft pushed back the first auto delivery to late 1950. The appearance of the SAAB 92 was clearly the work of an aircraft designer. Its round shape and sweeping aerodynamic lines resembled no other car. Like the Ford Model T, it came in only one color. SAAB's choice was dark green.
Well, we had painted all our aircraft in military green. So there were stocks of military green paint there, and that was why it came in green.
Most buyers liked the distinctive styling. The construction was extremely rigid, with a flat floor pan for low drag and clearance over rough, unplowed roads. The car was powered by a water-cooled 25 horsepower, two-stroke, two-cylinder engine. In 1951, the Korean War broke out. SAAB was now producing the J-29 fighter jet, known as the Flying Barrel. Skilled labor was in short supply. Wages soared. Rising costs affected SAAB's car production. SAAB's retail distributor suggested that they needed a $500 price increase. This would allow them to make the car more attractive by adding a trunk and a larger rear window. They also wanted to increase the headroom in the rear to make the seats more comfortable. The 92B was introduced in the fall of 1952. It absorbed the production capacity that was not already being used for aircraft. The 92 hit the World Rally circuit with stunning success. Rallying provided the perfect environment for engineers to test their concepts. The standard models were so robust that it was unnecessary to reinforce the chassis for competition. But the engines were modified to triple their output. The early successes showed the world that SAAB was as advertised, tough and reliable. SAAB's aviation efforts were also getting noticed. In 1955, the J-29 Flying Barrel achieved a world speed record of 1,000 kilometers or 621 miles an hour. Sweden saw the need to increase the funding for supersonic research. This decision reduced valuable resources needed for car production. By late 1955, Sixten Sarsen's new automobile design, the SAAB 93, was introduced. Although it sported a restyled front end, the real story was the smoother running, more powerful three-cylinder engine, which now delivered 33 horsepower. It was still a two-stroke engine and ran on a combination of gas and oil. To remind people to add oil to the mix when filling up, the gas cap had a printed reminder.
Two-stroke engines were really not that common in that period, and people that were used to conventional cars, they were filling just fuel, but our car had to have a combination of oil and fuel, and we had to highlight this, and of course it is necessary to highlight it when you start to fill the fuel. So that is why it was noted on the fuel filler cap, please put in oil and fuel.
SAAB began to discover the powers of advertising as marketing experts set their sights on America. The car's aviation heritage and competition prowess helped to get attention, but SAAB didn't want to move too fast. Without an efficient American parts and service organization, buyers might have to wait for weeks for repairs. SAAB concentrated their sales effort on small, manageable groups of affluent buyers. Surveys showed that over 90% of these buyers were satisfied with their cars. They especially liked the good fuel economy and unusual features like the ability to convert the cars for sleeping.
We didn't have the motels and hotels as you have here spread out over the country. So you had, like a snail, you had to have your house with you. So that was why it was created as a house, living house. So you could move wherever you liked, and you just parked the car and you slept in it.
Although Americans didn't like two-stroke engines, SAAB's rally reputation created excitement and public demand. In 1956, Saab entered 3 cars in the Great American Mountain Rally and made a clean sweep. A car that was equally at home sliding through the countryside or transporting a family to church wasn't for everybody, but it began to attract loyal buyers. Exports to the USA rose rapidly, from nearly 300 cars in 1956 to over 6,000 in 1959. In just 3 years, Saab had turned America into its main export market. Many of the early model Saabs can still be found in northwestern Washington state. 2 brothers alone own over 50 cars. Many proud Saab owners hope to drive their beloved cars forever. Skip Schott has made a living breathing new life into old Saabs. A collection of cars and parts is scattered around his house. As parts become more difficult to find, restorations take longer. The years have not been kind to many of these cars. In time, the metal and paint succumb to age and mileage. Some call this assortment of cast-off parts junk. Others see it as a treasure chest of opportunities.
We drove this car up yesterday. A lot of fun to drive. Ran 55 miles an hour in the freeway, no problem at all. Just a lot of people waved at us, we waved back and smiled. When we organize an event for our club, we try to organize it someplace that we can drive to, because that's what they're made to be done. We don't trailer them around and spit and polish them. They get polished, but they also get driven. Well, the two-strokers, they do smoke, and that's part of the mystique. And the people that are dyed-in-the-wool two-strokers, they're always smelling the smoke. And the real aficionados, they discuss the nuance of the smoke, and is it really the old high-M oil, or is it new Spectro oil, or what is the nuance of this smoke? And a lot of people think it's pollution, but no, it's really clouds of love is what it is.
On the rally circuit, the Saabs of the 1950s produced even more smoke. Modified engines were now producing 50 to 60 horsepower. Eric Carlson proved what skill, daring, and a great little car could do. A legend among rally drivers, Carlson thrilled the racing world with his hard-charging style and competitive spirit.
His rallying became famous because he took extremely high risks with a very, very small car. He is named as Eric Carlson on the roof, and that is, of course, because he really took very, very big risks and turned over on the roof several times. But being that risk taker and trying to cope with it, he also became a winner.
Even in the hands of an everyday driver, the Saab 93 was an impressive off-road machine, allowing the driver complete control over the terrain. But world events couldn't be controlled. In 1956, trouble in the Middle East led to the world's first oil crisis. In Sweden, the result was a ban on Sunday driving by private motorists and the introduction of gas rationing. This had an immediate effect on car sales. When oil was plentiful again, Saab was ready with a new model. The Saab 95, a 2-door estate model or station wagon, was offered in 1959. Sixten Sarsen had envisioned a car much like the elegant Chevy Nomad. Performance-minded buyers felt its only drawback was a disappointing 3-speed transmission. In 1960, after 10 years of car making, Saab unveiled its 3rd model. The 96 became a Saab classic, featuring 50s body styling with 60s technology. The 96 featured Saab's first 4-speed transmission for commercial use. Other features included a remote hood release, a bigger 3-cylinder engine, an upgraded braking system, and an improved heater. Saab modified the instrument panel, making the controls easier to see and operate. Even the pedals were redesigned. The biggest improvement came with increased production at the Trollhättan plant. Now Saab had the capacity of producing 30 to 40,000 cars a year. By January 1965, Saab had produced more than 250,000 automobiles. It took just one more year to reach 300,000. Saab made a total of 1,500 product improvements on the 96 during the first 6 years of production. The new Monte Carlo model of the 96 offered a 55 horsepower engine, independent lubrication, and a triple carburetor.
It was really just an upgrading of performance, offering different interior appearance with bucket seats. It had a wooden steering wheel. So it was really looking more into the sporty market. And I think the flavor was really coming from England, where you had a lot of sports cars.
Times were good. Production was up. The car business was booming. But internally, there was a struggle going on. Gunnar Ljungström was fighting for the introduction of a 4-stroke engine. An improved paint job couldn't hide the fact that the 2-stroke engines were trouble. Officially, they were reliable, but in fact, they had an endless succession of serious problems that the engineers were getting tired of solving. But Saab had spent a fortune on expanding its facilities, and management said there was no money to develop and produce a new engine. Bolstered by surveys that showed over 75% of the Swedish public would buy a 4-stroke car, the engineers launched a series of tests. They were determined either to fix the 2-stroke or convince management that increased sales would warrant the cost of retooling. The engineers subjected a series of 4- and 2-stroke engines to the most rigorous tests. This search for perfection was often pursued on the Saab test track with extreme secrecy. Saab engineers tested suspension, brakes, and engine performance. Saab's newly established rally department was able to engineer an amazing 86 horsepower from the tiny 2-stroke engines, but the cars were still temperamental and difficult to control and drive. Engine development had reached its limit. While engine testing continued, the 96 became a rally machine. Saab's newly established rally department was able to engineer an amazing 86 horsepower from the tiny 2-stroke engine. But the cars were still temperamental creations that were difficult to control and drive. Engine development had clearly reached its limit. A company hero, Erik Karlsson, was known as an aggressive driver. He'd charge into blind corners on the theory that the road had to go somewhere. From 1961, Karlsson won the British RAC Rally 3 times in a row. He also won at the Monte Carlo Rally in 1962 and 63. But Saab was no match for the new 200 horsepower machines that Ford, Porsche, and Fiat were about to introduce. Gunnar Ljungström and engineer Rolf Melida continued to champion the development of a four-stroke engine. But management said the two-stroke must be fine if it's winning. By 1964, SAAB was the only company using two-stroke technology, and sales were falling. Change finally came in 1967. The 96 was transformed. The two-stroke was finished. In the late 60s, America was overtaken by events in Vietnam. This conflict would extend into the mid-70s, bringing with it a new generation of cars and a new generation of buyers. Even though Sweden took no part in Vietnam, the Swedish Ministry of Defense ordered 175 of SAAB's Viggen aircraft in 1968. While defense sales were important, orders weren't ignored. But SAAB would have to change to tap into the growing American market. In 1967, the SAAB Sonett was reborn. In 1956, a racing rule change had made it obsolete. It was a beautiful machine, but only 6 were originally produced. The revived Sonett was used to test new technology. Now it's one of the most valued SAABs ever produced. That same year, SAAB introduced its first world-class car. The era of inexpensive basic transportation was passing. It became clear to SAAB officials that the next car would have to be bigger and more comfortable. Sixt and Sarsen created a car with a long nose and a short rear deck. Enter the SAAB 99. The 99 took over 400,000 engineer hours of design. Like all SAABs, the prototype was built by hand. Although the 99 was a totally new car, it was still clearly a SAAB.
Well, the 99 was really to try to take the step up in a little larger car, more family-oriented, offering more space. It was from the very beginning four-stroke engine. It was also a very compact car, an extremely compact car from outside, but a very large car inside. And again, it was driven by engineers that wanted to offer a lot for least possible resources.
SAAB never used a frame in their cars. Unitary construction reduced weight and added strength. This allowed SAAB the luxury of building one model without expensive redesign when new, more powerful engines were introduced. The 99's first engine was a Triumph design. It would later be replaced by a Swedish 4-cylinder engine. Lab-coated destruction experts used every modern device to detect potential problems. For the first time, drivers could keep their headlights clear with the 99's new lamp wipers. Passengers rode in comfort with heated seats. SAAB had not tried to make a modern status symbol. They thought that common sense design would last longer and perform better in a competitive market. Disc brakes, coil springs, a floor-mounted gearshift, and overhead camshafts made the 99 a worldwide contender. Once again, rallying beckoned. But during the 70s, developments were affected by the oil crisis. SAAB began to experiment with turbocharging. A turbocharger gave a 4-cylinder engine V8 performance and good fuel economy. In 1978, SAAB introduced the astounding Turbo 99, setting a new competitive standard and boosting sales worldwide. But in the late 1970s, rally rules were changed. Totally modified cars could use budgets 10 to 20 times greater than SAAB could afford. SAAB left competition in 1980. In the 1980s, computer-aided design, robotics, and composite materials set new standards for SAAB excellence. The company was now on the leading edge of manufacturing technology. The first vehicle to be designed with this new generation of technology was the aerodynamic SAAB 900. Customers wanted something new, and SAAB wanted to make bigger and better equipped cars. At the same time, American collision safety standards were increasing. SAAB was already ahead of the game. It took its experience with the 99 and incorporated it into the SAAB 900. The 900 maintained the low drag characteristics of Gunnar Ljungström's first creation. SAAB was now building cars for an affluent and demanding market. The only way SAAB could compete in the luxury market was to lead the way. To establish this lead, they used independent suspension, coil springs, and 4-wheel disc brakes. The SAAB 900 was equipped with self-repairing bumpers, electronically heated seats, headlamp cleaners, an anti-lock braking system, and a turbo engine. Borrowing from their aerospace experience, SAAB's engineers developed a feature that allowed the engine to recognize and burn multi-octane fuels. Engine development became an obsession through the 1980s. The demand for more power created multi-valve engines and the turbo. SAAB collaborated with General Motors to develop a new V6 engine. Production of the 900 reached its peak in 1984, with over 88,000 cars that year. As the world's automotive market becomes more competitive, it's more difficult to increase sales. But SAAB believes that the 900 sales will keep growing throughout the 1990s. The Cabriolet will always be remembered as the hottest 900 ever produced. Originally introduced in 1986 for the American market, over 27,000 were sold in that first year. SAAB was at work on a new model. The 9000, unveiled in 1984, offered all the safety, performance, and fuel economy SAAB's technology could provide. Public safety concerns and the energy crisis had called for new designs and new thinking. The 9000 answered that need. SAAB took extreme care to ensure that this car would prove to be one of the finest in the world. Designing a car which was smaller on the outside than the 900, yet larger on the inside, seemed impossible. But with the use of computer modeling and a philosophy of elegant simplicity, the impossible was achieved. The 9000 was given a longer wheelbase, a wider track, a transversely mounted engine, and front-wheel drive. This combination ensured that the engine occupied the smallest possible space and maximized the room available for the occupants and their luggage. Externally smaller than the 900, the 9000 was the biggest car the company built. The press loved it. The days of glory have not passed. For SAAB, the challenge of performance is impossible to ignore. Under the supervision of NASCAR, the long-run endurance test was conducted at the Alabama International Speedway in Talladega. After 20 days of all-out driving, each car totaled 100,000 kilometers, or 62,000 miles, equal to 2.5 times around the world, with the best average speed of 132 miles an hour. Profit margins were shrinking, production costs were rising, and there were strong new competitors. SAAB, like many of the smaller manufacturers, recognized that surviving in the future would be a precarious balancing act. New production technology made car production so flexible that the big manufacturers would soon be able to produce low-volume cars and be profitable. Small producers like SAAB were under attack.
So the natural way to progress was let's look and see if we can associate ourselves with some of these large guys. It was their only way that they saw they could continue to be a successful and profitable company.
We early understood that it was necessary for SAAB to have partnership with some of the big car manufacturers, because the development for the future is very costly. You need to have huge resources, and we understood that we couldn't move into the future by ourselves.
GM wanted a European luxury model to add to their car line. Unable to acquire Jaguar, they began a courtship with SAAB.
They wanted an established luxury brand because they had tried for several years to elevate the Opel products into those segments in Europe, and they were unsuccessful in doing that. You know, again, it's brand positioning. The Opel is positioned as a volume car in the European, and the luxury buyer just would not accept that as a real entry into those segments.
GM began to look seriously at SAAB. SAAB was not a luxury car per se, but it was a near luxury car, and an association with SAAB would solve some of GM's other problems.
In the early 1990s, the European market was really starting to grow. General Motors was very tight for capacity, and SAAB had excess capacity. So it also provided them some capacity for some of the GM products.
They announced a joint venture with General Motors in March of 1990. SAAB lovers hope the two corporate cultures will provide the resources for continuing SAAB's unique blend of technology and performance. Investors hope the arrangement will make SAAB more competitive. The response to the introduction of the revamped 900 in 1994 indicates that both camps will be pleased. In the end, the consumers have the last word, and so far they like what they see. There are plans for an updated 9000 and a completely new model.
To be successful, we have to grow. For the next couple of years, our outlook is in the area of 100,000 to 120,000 cars. We think by the end of this decade, we have to be producing 150, and in the post-2000 period, we have to be producing more than 200,000 cars a year. To do that will mean two things. Number one, a broadened product line. A lot of feasibility studies, a lot of market research going on today as to what type of markets should we be looking at, what type of market segments we should be looking at, and then secondly, what markets should we be in.
Deeply rooted in its aircraft heritage, sharing ideas and technologies, always looking for new solutions, SAAB is unique in the auto world. The story of SAAB is a story of refinement, always looking to solve problems from a different point of view. SAAB risked its future on adventurous design and technology. From the smoking two-stroke engines to the screaming turbos, SAAB has always chosen to do things its own way.